Check, check, toast, toast. What up, gang? What's up, special beings? We're talking about Gene Hackman tonight. R.I.P. to Gene Hackman. We're going to talk about one of the greats tonight. That was Rooks G with Altered Self. Check out his channel. That's our good buddy over there. We use his music. Shouts out to Rooks G. Hey, we're talking about Gene Hackman tonight, the great Gene Hackman who passed away. And he was 95 years old. A lot of these guys, a lot of these classic dudes are really getting up there, right? Clint Eastwood is 94 years old. Thank you, Jason. Appreciate you. Thank you for keeping it steady for me there. Clint Eastwood, 94 years old. Michael Caine is up there. Sean Connery passed away. There's a bunch of them. There's a bunch of people in this list. Don DeLeo, by the way, Don DeLillo is 89 years old. Cormac McCarthy passed away. But we're talking about Gene Hackman tonight, and I thought I would, what's interesting is if you were here for the last couple streams, some of them are in members now. Still got the Godfather Coda up right now. But I mentioned Gene Hackman twice on two different streams right before he passed away, and that's because I was cognizant of the fact that, not only was this dude, he was getting up there to the centennial mark. I mean, it's crazy. He has such a body of work. Gene Hackman's body of work is pretty insane. He worked for many decades. He got one of his early roles in Bonnie and Clyde, of course, with Warren Beatty. And it's interesting the sort of stage that sets for his work because Bonnie and Clyde, of course, is known as, I haven't seen it in a while, and I've seen it a couple times, but it's what it's really known as for film people is the fact that it's the first movie with blood. It's the 70s really went hard into first a kind of very syrupy, ketchupy looking blood. But it was interesting that before this, movies did not have a sort of a realistic depiction of violence. And of course, this is strange because there are a number of, film had already reached its golden age. Hollywood had reached its golden age, and then it gone, beyond that. And World War II really did some interesting things with film because even though during World War II we have a lot of film, propaganda films, and then we get some of the great films that come out around World War II, and then afterwards it leaves such an obvious and indelible mark on the rift in life in the world that entertainment does a weird thing. It's sort of entertainment and art in terms of film really pick up from World War II and use that as a theme and a setting for so long that we're still seeing World War II films, but they depict things in a very strange way. And one of the ways that they depict war is we have set pieces and we have a way of looking at war, and things can seem conflicted. I mean, look at The Great Escape. The Great Escape is a good example of this. That it's a great film, and it's an adventure film, but there's an obvious lack of the visceral nature of the way that we see war now every day, on our handheld devices or whatever, and not to mention people that obviously have there are people that watch the show that have served in the military and been in combat. I have a friend who was in combat, and it's that's not our role. But one thing that happens is that when you sort of reach that arc into at the end of the 60s, you start to go into more of a verite type of filmmaking that ended up in the auteur 70s, and the auteur 70s really it's a time in Hollywood where people like Robert Evans are running wild in Hollywood, and they have free reign to do whatever they want because this is a artistic reaction to the 60s. And there were some people in the 60s that were pretty renegade as far as film goes. I mean, look at, Sam Peckinpah and some of these guys. But the 70s was something completely different, and that's when a lot of the ways that people describe film in the 70s would be an ethnic casting, and that's because not only do we get people who are not just like wasps in film, but we start to get people who have a more hardcore, gritty look to them. Now that's interesting because that had really always been the case, but with the advent of full Technicolor, full Panavision, and the movie going experience became something much more regular. Well, we see people like Gene Hackman emerge, and Gene Hackman is. I've always liked this dude a lot. I've always liked him in movies, and one of the reasons, just a personal reason, is that Gene Hackman looks exactly like a friend of mine's dad, who is named Gene. I mean, they look exactly they look exactly alike, and his name is Gene. Everybody refers to him as Gene Hackman. So that's just a personal reason why I've always liked him, but also because he's always been there. He's always in movies. He's in every decade. He has been a major movie figure, and I try to avoid a term like realism. It's not just the realism of the films of the 70s, or because when I think of realism in terms of art, I tend to think of realism going into something like naturalism in literature, and that's where we get things like Frank Norris's McTeague, which is this crazy book, is where people sort of degenerate into the role of beasts, and it's sort of devoid of meaning. And it's not exactly what happened in the 70s, but what happened was we get an artistic equal and opposite reaction from the 60s and the revolution and rebellion of the 60s, and we go into something that's much, much grittier. It's always described as grittier, as grit, and a sort of realistic look at urban environments. Hence, we get a lot of Francis Ford Coppola, Martin Scorsese, Robert Evans movies, and pretty much a lot of Gene Hackman. In the 80s, we get, again, a reaction to that, which I've already covered, but I brought out the book again because Gene Hackman plays a role in this. This is the book High Concept, which is by Charles Fleming, and is a great sort of study on Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer and what they did in the 80s. And remember that what's in the late 80s and then into the 90s. And I was just rewatching Crimson Tide, which, by the way, I've always enjoyed, and it is a fun movie to watch. But it is not great, and it's good for what it is, but it is not a great. There are too many words in the movie, and you will notice that if you go back to watch it. A lot of the reactions that take place and a lot of the dialogue that takes place in the film is too verbose and is completely illogical. A lot of every time one of the major characters makes an argument, it seems to be pressing the point home in the exact opposite way that they meant for it to happen. And that's as a result of the emphasis on snappy dialogue, and there's too much dialogue. In fact, if you didn't know this, Simpson and Bruckheimer hired Quentin Tarantino to punch up the script, and you can tell in parts where Tarantino has done that. And I think that it's okay, it's fine. And I think Tarantino is a writer non peril for what he does, especially. But I think that one of the things that happens is we get a sort of style over substance in a way, and that's fine for the movie because it's an enjoyable movie. But there's simply Gene Hackman was given too much dialogue in the film, and it ends up weakening his character in the movie. And I don't know if I think that might be part of the point of the film, that the character he plays in Crimson Tide is he has too much emphasis on his own rep and his own legend as a captain of the submarine. And so he has to constantly tell people rather than show through experience what he's the opposite of Ramius, for example. I covered Ramius with Mark Hackard in Hunt for Red October, and he's really the exact opposite of Sean Connery's character in The Hunt for Red October. And it's interesting because Crimson Tide really was developed by Simpson and Bruckheimer as a way to, they basically said, hey, let's have a movie where we get sort of father-son conflict here, a sort of Freudian thing going on with father-son conflict, and we're going to divide it between races, and we're also going to put a bunch of sweaty dudes in a canister for 2 hours and have them hash it out to a weird resolution in the end where it's kind of a draw. And it actually works. I mean, it's a really good film, but it does not have the same effect or the same purpose as Hunt for Red October does. Hunt for Red October is so great because the exterior conflict is what drives the inner conflict of the characters, and it sort of works in a symbiotic fashion. For Ramius is pushing the submarine and pushing his people and then pushing his own sort of saga towards defection. And also he's rebelling against the sort of system that he has encountered within the USSR. And he's a character bent on honor. And it's the same thing in Crimson Tide, except for the threat is one that is clearly contained within the parameters of the Cold War. And Crimson Tide lacks that because Crimson Tide is after the dissolution of the USSR, and now we're kind of looking for an enemy, and then we have the Balkan Wars to kind of take the place of that. So now we have a renegade, and it should make sense, and it kind of makes sense on paper, but it does not make sense in the context of the film. It just it doesn't really hash out. And if you rewatch the movie, you'll see what I mean. There's just too much dialogue. So without going into too much dialogue about the film, let's talk about some other things with Gene Hackman. Let's talk about his two, I think, best roles, and he has a lot of great roles. I mean, there's actually, just side note, there's another Balkan conflict movie with Gene Hackman that's actually really great, and that's called Behind Enemy Lines. So we have a couple of Tony Scott movies here, and Behind Enemy Lines is great because that and Crimson Tide are both pre-Big Nine movies, and one thing that Simpson and Bruckheimer really set forth in movies is they took the buddy cop concept that came out in the 70s with French Connection, which I'm going to discuss, and they took away a lot of the grit and sort of serious psychotic notion of the maniacal cop. That's what Popeye Doyle becomes, and they gave it humor. So there's a contrast between the two cops. It's always, I picked the wrong day to retire. Well, Popeye Doyle is nowhere near retiring, and Roy Scheider's nowhere near retiring. They're actually pretty young guys in the French Connection, even though they look super old. I mean, Hackman was like 41 or 40 when he made the movie, and he looks so old. But it works in the film because he is so great. He's got these like gradations on his face just from living in the hellscape, total hellhole of early 70s New York City. And of course it's a Friedkin film. So there's this element of like a real sense of hellish violence and this just awful world that they're living in. And it also speaks to what later happened in the 90s, I think, with a movie like Heat, where you have Al Pacino's character kind of picks that up. He's much more sleek in LA, but when you have the cops and robbers genre and that is transferred to LA in the 90s, it becomes a completely different aesthetic vision of the world and of crime. Something that becomes highline robbery, which takes its cue from high concept, a kind of artistic cue from high concept filmmaking with Simpson and Bruckheimer. But they really took off. He was also in the sequel to The Conversation with Enemy of the State. I mean, it's really a sequel. Hackman's character is the same character in that film. Of course, he's trying to help William Smith, right, who is running around. And remember, if you've seen Enemy of the State, like recently, it is really astounding, I think, the difference in what you may have thought about the film when it came out, if you're old like me or whatever. When that movie came out in the 90s, that's one of those movies. My family, when we would watch films together, we always joke about this. My dad would always joke about it. It's kind of like in The Fugitive, where they're like, take the north side of the building. And you're like, what the fuck is the north side of the building, dude? You're in a staircase and there's no north written on the walls. Or they run out of the front of the building instead of saying like, oh, they're on 11th between, Avenue B and C or something. Or they ran out the front door, they ran left, they're running northwest. And you're like, what? How do you, nobody's got a compass. I guess the cops it's kind of like they know the directions of the city. I mean, New York is easy because it's in a grid system, but usually that doesn't work. Like if you're in The Fugitive and Tommy Lee Jones is like, I don't care, right? And you're in the woods and the sun is down, and what is he gonna? He knows north by the constellation. It doesn't make sense. But Enemy of the State does that but it becomes the panopticonical. That's the word I just made up. Panopticonical, eye in the sky, where the characters are running around, and Jack Black, who's in Jack Black in Enemy of the State, he's one of the computer techs. He's also in The Jackal, which is another one of these movies, the Jackal remake, which is actually not bad. Remember sorry for all the tangents, but the Jackal remake had the automated sniper system, and I think they ended up using that on Soleimani or something a few years ago. What's the name of the Iranian general? Was it Soleimani? I forget his name. Somebody in the chat will know. But I think that was the same exact thing. It predicted that in terms of a assassination method or tactic. But Enemy of the State is wild because, they can see you. They've got you bugged. They've got you bugged everywhere, and you're always looking for bugs. And it seemed ridiculous at the time. But it turned out to be true. It turned out to be a true movie. And it's a lot easier to understand now because everybody carries their own surveillance device around with them 24/7. You sleep beside it every night. So it's much more believable in light of Snowden's Prism and Bill Binney. But what brings life to the movie really is this juxtaposition between the runaway hero who's being chased, the chased hero played by William Smith, and Eugene Hackman, who is the kind of functions as a Deus Ex Machina in a way, like in media res. He's there to help. He's not a psychopomp. He's a like a totemistic character in the proto 21st century techno quest. And Hackman is always great in movies because what I put if you read the description of this, what I put was basically that I kind of think of him as he's like a combination of a lot of the great actors from time past, and they each have a kind of thing that they're known for. But Hackman really subtly brings an amalgamation of all of these different character traits into one guy and manages to be completely normal. Do you remember in Family Guy when Brian says, I'm writing the great American novel? His name is Norm Hull because he's just a normal guy. John Q. Everyman, right? That's kind of what Hackman is, but he's not he everything about him is supposed to be normal. He looks normal. He kind of acts normal. He has meaning that he has regular human character traits. He's manly and he's tough, but he's also kind. But he's actually not normal. Yeah, that's right. That's right. The Duck. What is it? The Duke of. I forget what English Bob's book is going to be called. What's it called? The Duck. The Duke. The Duck. The Duck of Death. Right. Yeah. So what he is actually is so charismatic. Hackman manages to have this thing where he exudes energy. He is so energetic in movies without being spastic or without being steroidal. He is like this hulking body of charisma in films that is really, really electric. And I think that the Conversation, which I've already covered, is by far his best acting role. What I know about Hackman is, in terms of his personal life, is that he was 95 years old. He was a Marine. He joined the Marines. I think he lied about his age, and went off to serve. And he was, I think, 16 when he joined. So that would be right after World War II. He was in China leading up to the Korean War. And also that he was, he seems like he would be, he seems like the kind of actor, and I know I have a personal experience with the acting world that maybe some people here have, but probably not in the same way. I've known a lot of actors in my life, and I was an actor. But the thing about actors is that, and I know everybody here knows this, but usually actors who portray tough guys are the opposite of that. And it's irrelevant because it's what they portray on the screen for the artistic format that really matters. Who cares about their personal life? I don't really care about their personal life. I care about this guy's personal life because I think he was a really cool guy, and I like how he did very few interviews, and I like how I think it's not funny, but I think it's interesting how the media will say he was a recluse. He was reclusive for the last 20 years. He just retired. Reclusive to the media or to the average person thinking about movies, I guess, means, he was crazy because he didn't do movies anymore. He didn't do interviews. Why would he do it? First of all, why would an actor do interviews? Actors only do interviews because they're required to as part of their press junket, which goes along with their contract. Otherwise, or because to feed their ego, or because they're trying to get work, or that's their cast. That's actually the way that actors get cast in films is through interviews. It functions as like a free casting. You're broadcasting to casting directors all over the world. So you're going in for an audition, but you're on Conan or whatever. But there's no point in doing that. If you're an actor, if you're a serious actor, and you're not required to do those things, you would probably try to step back and never do interviews because it ruins. It kind of does two opposite things. Doing interviews for actors, it makes the public more interested in who you are as a human being, which they cross over into the film and they think that that's the person. But it also dilutes their image in terms of the film you're watching. So the more you get to know an actor or an actor's face, the less you feel like the role survives. So that's one reason why, Daniel Day-Lewis rarely does interviews and is always misnomered as this method actor when he's not. There's not really a method acting that exists anymore per se. I mean, it's the Stanislavski method and the actor studio are something that are kind of stale now in terms of what actors think that they are, or what people think that actors are. Daniel Day-Lewis is a classically trained actor. He went to my drama school. My drama teacher taught him. He was his coach on My Left Foot. My Left Foot was what he won his first Oscar for. He was taught by John Hartog. He's a classically trained actor from an Olivier school. He's not a method actor, but it's irrelevant. And Daniel Day-Lewis will say that it's irrelevant. Method acting and classical acting are kind of at odds with each other, but it's irrelevant for how you kind of come to how you portray yourself in the film. And that's what Hackman, I think I really admire Hackman for, because I know that what Morgan Freeman said and what others have said about him after he's passed away is, and I'd heard this before in interviews or things about him, was that it was just, actors talk about their craft, and Hackman will talk about his craft a lot, but it's really his work. They say do the work and all that stuff. That becomes kind of bullshit. But in terms of doing the work, the real thing, the job of an actor, especially an actor who is coming out of drama school or an actor who's getting started in the industry, is to work. It's to get work. And this may seem like a wanky concept to a lot of people, but it really makes sense in the fact that you think about a normal job and a noble job. I consider a noble job something like, if you're a bricklayer, I use this all the time, but if you're a bricklayer or you're you work on a line, or you work on roads, or you're part of a crew, or you're paving roads, or you're laying asphalt, those are noble jobs to me, because that's something that a man goes out and does his job. He has a duty to do. He goes out, he does his job, and he goes home at the end of it, and he goes back to his family. He's not going to take overtime to go lay the road, because he'll have overtime, for his family or whatever, and he'll, you want to make money. But usually a lot of these guys that you guys probably know have families that they're trying to support, so they work and then they go home. And that is noble to me. I think that, not to get off on too much of a tangent here, but I think I've really been thinking about this a lot personally, And I think it's one of the most insidious things in our society. This is a natural result, I think, of what people used to describe as the Protestant work ethic in America. And that's great. That's part of what built America. But the problem is that now we're in the 21st century and people don't know boundaries. They don't know the boundary between life and work. And I think that it's important. This is not advice or whatever, obviously not. But people will know this watching this, that it's important that if you have a job, your job is important, but everyone's really replaceable in their job. You want to be irreplaceable, but everyone's really replaceable in their job. You think that you aren't, but you are. And so it's important to do the best to do your best work and to give yourself every day and to do your job. But when it's time to go home, go home. Go home to your family. Go out with your friends. Go hang. You're not at your work all the time, because we tend to confuse. I think people in general in society tend to confuse work life with their life. Now, unless you're doing something like, for instance, acting work can be like this, because if you're an actor, you're really doing something that is completely unnecessary in the world. You're playing, it's like Peter O'Toole and Richard Burton said, you're playing dress up, you are putting on makeup. It's a very feminine type of work when you think about it. It's a childish work. And yet it is also something that is completely necessary. Every civilization, everything, since the beginning of time, people have needed to do things in their off-work life that allow them reflection and humor and gravitas and tragedy and a prism through which to look at the world. And that's one thing that I kind of really admire about Hackman, is that he always described his work as work. He constantly wanted to work. If you're an actor, especially if you're a stage actor, and you get a contract and you work, let's say you're working off Broadway and you're doing sometimes two shows a day. It's a lot, and it's a different kind of work than if you're doing manual labor all day or if you're a banker or a lawyer. But when you're doing those things, you're doing the best that you can. You're trying to portray another human being accurately and truthfully. And it can be extremely tiresome and tiring, because obviously, to be an actor, you have to be a sensitive soul. You have to be a sensitive type of person. You're an artistic type of person. You have rehearsals for months leading up to it, and then you do your performances. But then guess what? The performance ends, and sometimes the play might end, or the film gets cut short, or you don't get the role. And then what are you going to do? So unless you have equity, or unless you have SAG or whatever, and you have life insurance, you have health insurance, then you got to get work right away. And there's a million other people trying to get the same exact thing that you do. And if you're a woman, by the way, it is extremely difficult. This is why, like drama school, like when I was in drama school, in our class, we had 10 guys, 4 girls. Because it's a sort of an accurate ratio for the movie industry. They're much, now it's different. And that's kind of why movies are suffering, because people can see that it's not an accurate representation of the way life really is, because it's just, there are more men in movies than women, and now it's sort of flipped. And so it's very difficult to get roles for ladies. But I like Hackman because he did this work, and then he described his work, and he just did the best that he could. And he wasn't really, it didn't seem to be publicly very interested in analyzing his own work or talking about it in too much of a, I don't know. He had no truck with the sentimental, it seems. I don't know what the real guy was like, but I do know that while being a Marine, while being a rough-looking dude, obviously an athletic guy, he was also interested in being a pilot. He was a pilot. He raced cars. He was interested in dude stuff. But he was also a painter, and he was a writer. He wrote 5 novels, and he co-wrote 5 novels. And when he talks about his work, in the few instances that I've seen, he talks about them with a kind of depth and sincerity that you don't really see, and an honest sincerity that you see with other actors. So, that being said, let's talk about his first Oscar win, which was 1971 with The French Connection. This is a movie by William Friedkin. And it stars Gene Hackman and Roy Scheider. And this, I have a feeling that a lot of people probably haven't seen this movie because it's from 1971, but it is a fantastic movie. It's really an important movie. It's an important movie in terms of the canon of literature. Is my audio all right? I got to make sure. I always got to make sure because I don't want it to fuck up like it did, did that other time. Hold on. Let me check it. Okay, we should be good. I just wanted to make sure for you guys, so if you're listening back, that it didn't get all poppy and scratchy like it did on that other stream. That was a real shame. Yeah, The French Connection, which has a sequel called The French Connection 2, which I've got The French Connection 2 on DVD. I don't have French Connection 1. French Connection 2 is where Hackman goes, his character Popeye Doyle, thank you, appreciate it, y'all, goes to Marseille, and basically they capture him and get him addicted to heroin. French Connection 1 is really one of the great and underrated and underviewed drug movies. Drug movies are a particular genre of film. Train Spotting is probably at the top of these. You have a whole bunch of them, but Pulp Fiction is one of those. But French Connection really has a kind of remake sort of sequel in American Gangster with Denzel. Denzel is with Gene Hackman, of course, in Crimson Tide. And that movie does I love American Gangster. I think it's really well done. You know, it's Ridley Scott. It does a really great job of depicting the Vietnam Kun Sa pipeline, the opium pipeline back to America during the 70s. This is stuff Alfred McCoy talked about in the great seminal work, Politics of Heroin, which I've talked about a million times and is a fantastic, you have to get a copy. If you're into this stuff at all, if you're into Seaspiracy, history, Vietnam film, all these different things, you have to get Professor Alfred McCoy's The Politics of Heroin, the drugs in Southeast Asia. I forget the subtitle, but it is a fantastic book, and it is comprehensive and all-encompassing, and it really, a lot of it deals with Kun Sa, the Burmese warlord in the Golden Triangle during the Vietnam era, and he gets Frank, Denzel Washington's character. He's basically a Kuomintang exiled army, and they're funding themselves through opium production, and then that moves over to the United States. They move it here in coffins. This is a true story. Blue magic. I don't care what you call it. Call it fucking Pepsi if you want to, but you don't call it blue magic. You telling me, words like this, please, you come in here, fuck all that. Cuba Gooding goes crazy in that one scene. That's alpaca. Blot that shit. Great movie, dude. Great movie. Well, so The French Connection is the origin of that movie. And The French Connection really is one of the first true buddy cop movies. It's also a movie that sets the stage for every Steven Seagal movie, every Lethal Weapon movie, every cop movie, every cop show, every NYPD Blue, The Shield, every fucking, excuse my language, folks, every cop show, every drug movie, every cop, cops versus drug dealers movie that you're going to see really comes from The French Connection in a sense. And this is because William Friedkin really did something with this. Basically, the movie's basically about, we've got Popeye Doyle played by Gene Hackman and Roy Scheider, his partner. They work for the NYPD. They're on a special assignment of narcotics, and they are tailing. It's a very simple story. They are tailing a Frenchman who's in New York who's trying to make a gigantic heroin deal. He's shipped over like 100-something pounds of heroin inside of a car, and it's supposed to be one of the first. It's based on one of the first instances of major trafficking and connection between Marseille and New York. And this is something that still occurs, not necessarily with Marseille, but it's what sets the stage for the pipeline. And this is because the Marseille Corsican mob gangsters were working post World War II, breaking up communist strikes in France for the CIA and for the CIA allied intelligence services. And in exchange, they were given sort of free reign with opium traffic, moving raw opium from Turkey through Marseille, and then processing it and moving it to New York. And then this is how CIA, of course, was funding with their black budget. So they say. And so that's basically the movie. But the reason it's great is because, first of all, there's very little dialogue in the movie. There are sequences in the film where there is almost no talking for like a solid 45 minutes, and it is so fantastic. It's one of the great movies that shows versus tells. We need very little information on what's happening because in the verite style, we are following these two cops in their POV through the streets of New York, and they're moving their way up the food chain, and they are chasing this guy. And the other reason it's great is because Gene Hackman is absolutely relentless in the movie. He starts off in the film as, first of all, the film begins in Marseille, and we see the long journey of heroin from France all the way to the United States, and we see this guy played by Fernando Rey. Is that his name, Fernando Rey? And he's going to ship it in an American car, and then he's going to ship the money back, and he's going to connect with the New York mob. And I guess this was in real life. This would be like Santa Trafficante connected with. This was like the Lucchese crime family, and then Lucky Luciano had this post World War II. But there's a bunch of characters involved. But in the movie, it's strictly French. It's a French guy. They refer to him as Frog Number One, and they just kind of happen upon this character because the way it begins is that Hackman is in a Santa Claus outfit, and Roy Scheider is like selling hot dogs, and they basically are tailing this guy, this low-level dealer, inside of a New York bar, and it looks like nighttime, but then it turns into day. And that's interesting because the transition from day to night, which is actually all daytime, is indicative of the fact that New York at the time kind of exists in an eternal night. And Friedkin really goes hard on the kind of pseudo hellish imagery in this, where all he's really doing is depicting New York City. He goes, the guy mentions 125th Street, up on 105th Street, and the mall is a junkie won't be. Remember that song? Up past 110th Street. He's up there in Harlem, and then it's like they go to the East Village. They're in the Bowery, but everything looks the same, and it is like it looks like Magaza right now. That's what it looks like. Total devastation. It looks like everything has been bombed. It looks like Blitz London. The concrete's crumbling. There's trash everywhere. There's peep shows and hookers and junkies. And this is what Paul Schrader and Martin Scorsese took on for later on in 1976, around 1976, for Taxi Driver. Right? One day a real rain's going to come and wash the scum from the streets. That's what it becomes. This is 1971, though, and it is awful. So they chase this guy into this alleyway, and this is when Gene Hackman really gives his breakthrough monologue where he slaps this guy around. They're kicking him, they're slapping him, and they're beating him up. And he gives this monologue where he says, have you been to Poughkeepsie? Have you ever been to Poughkeepsie? You were sitting on the edge of your bed picking your feet. You took off your shoes and you picked your feet. I'm going to bust you for selling H, and I'm going to bust you for picking your feet in Poughkeepsie. And it's a very, very weird monologue. But the reason it's important is because Hackman, I really think that Hackman, with that one particular monologue with Roy Scheider beside him, really broke through. I mean, he had been in Bonnie and Clyde, and he really broke through, and that's really what won him the Best Actor Oscar for this movie, which also won Best Picture and Best Director. And it's just so fantastic. I mean, the thing about the film is that we no longer have real noir elements. We kind of look like we have noir elements because Popeye Doyle has this stupid pork pie hat on, and he looks kind of like 50s man, but he's also he is the embodiment of the tough as hell Irish cop. And this is, I think, when you watch the movie, it shows one of the ways that the police have evolved in the United States. I mean, it takes some cues from the gunslingers and from the sheriffs and marshals of Wild West sort of mythology, but it's way before the militarized police of post Big Nine. In the 80s and 90s, the way cops were portrayed was it's different in movies. In real life, cops were kind of like, there was gang violence and there was stuff, and but they were really like, a cop was supposed to keep the peace, right? So it's not like, well, we got a zero tolerance for that, man. It was like, it was as long as you keep the peace and keep civilization sort of at bay. But these guys are really, I think this movie is really like where cops sort of go into this protect and serve mode, which is where they exist on a sort of different plane than the regular people in society. And there are very few regular people portrayed in the movie. Almost everybody in the French Connection looks like a criminal. And so it takes somebody like Gene Hackman's character and Roy Scheider to really sniff out, and they can identify right away who were the bad guys, and then they spend their whole time going after this. Their lives are complete shit. Hackman lives in this this old like satanic mill, the Blakean satanic mill, a hellish factory. And there's a scene where he gets put off. He gets relieved of duty for a minute, and he goes home. And he's like in his he's in his civilian dress. He's always in plain clothes, but he's in like civilian dress, kind of dressed down. And he's walking along, and there's a lady walking in front of him, and all of a sudden she gets shot at, and he immediately gets on the ground. He goes, "There's a sniper! There's a sniper on the roof! Leave her alone!" The woman's dead. The carriage is still sitting right there. He does this weird flip where it looks like if you got like a 1968 Green Bay Packer to do a somersault on a field. That's what he's doing. It's very it's just very rough. And he reaches for his ankle holster. He pulls out a 38. He chases the guy all the way up he goes up to the roof to catch the guy, the roof, as some people say. The roof of the building. He sees a rifle sitting there. The guy has been sent to snipe him. He sees him running, and then he runs down, and this precipitates one of the best chase sequences in film. The movie Ronin took a lot from this also. Ronin is European and ironically in the south of France. It's in the Côte d'Azur. They're in Nice, etc. And it becomes much more stylized. It involves intelligence and all this stuff. This is a cop chasing an assassin. Assassins will play a role in the next analysis, which is Unforgiven. But this French guy has been sent to kill him, and First, he chases him down the street. Then he hijacks a car. Then he goes after the guy. He goes up to the subway. The guy's already in the subway. He can't catch him. And then he gets back in the car. He crashes the car all over the fucking place. He finally ends up, the guy gets out of the subway after shooting a cop. And then finally, he shoots him at the bottom of these stairs. And it is one of the great sequences in film. Now, this is the shot. This is the shot where... This is from Understanding Movies, a book I picked up in college, just about basic book about movies. But this is Gene Hackman, and this is the Frenchman that he shoots, turning around to run back up, shoots him in the back. And this is really fantastic. What it says in this book is, and look at the diagram here. You look at the character in terms of the diagram of the storyboard, and it says, The French Connection, USA, 1971, William Friedkin. Expansive outward movements and sunburst effects are generally associated with explosive emotions like joy or terror. In this shot, however, the symbolism is more complex. The scene occurs at the climax of a furious chase sequence in which the protagonist, Gene Hackman with gun, finally triumphs over a vicious killer by shooting him, just as he seems on the verge of eluding the dogged police officer once again. The kinetic outburst on the screen symbolizes not only the bullet exploding in the victim's body, but a joyous climax for the protagonist after his humiliating and dangerous pursuit. The kinetic ecstasy of death also releases the dramatic tension that is built up in the audience during the chase sequence. In effect, we are seduced into sharing the protagonist's joy in the kill. It's a really, really amazing scene. And what Friedkin does here with Hackman is, again, we have this long, long chase sequence, and this is why Gene Hackman is great, because it takes him very little dialogue. He's one of the best yellers on screen. I mean, Gene Hackman can explode in anger unlike anybody on screen. And it's because even though he sounds angry and he sounds forceful. There's this weird thing that he does with his eyes where he smiles and it doesn't look psychotic. Usually when a person smiles and they're angry or they're yelling, they look like I had a teacher like this, and he'd be like, huh? You think that's funny? Huh? And that's psychotic. Hackman is not psychotic. He's not psycho. He's not psychotic. He's not mentally deranged. He is absolutely normal. And he is expressing what we, the audience, think during the film. And in fact, one weird thing is that the more menacing he is, the more human it makes him, because his eyes have a kindness to them. And that sounds really weird, but I think if you watch a Gene Hackman movie, next time you watch a Hackman movie, you will see exactly what I mean. There is a light in his eyes, and a lot of times, and this is not because he doesn't know how to act, and it's not because it's Hackman, or maybe it is portraying himself through this, but it's the character showing that they are doing these things for a reason, and they have a humanity, and that he wants to catch this motherfucker who has shot 2 people on the subway. And this guy it's crazy because Hackman's character, Popeye Doyle, is really operating both inside and outside the law. He's both the ultimate Irish cop in New York at the time. In fact, the 2 cops, by the way, that the Popeye and Roy Scheider are based on are in the film. They were consultants for the film. They're in the film, and they're the guys who tell him he's dismissed. And I think one of them gets killed in the end of the film. He's playing a character in the movie, and he gets killed. And the guy really does look like, he doesn't look like Hackman, but he looks exactly like, if you saw that guy in the film, you'd go, oh, that's the real guy. That's absolutely the real guy. He looks out of shape. He looks big. But how can Hackman be out of shape in the movie? He's running the whole fucking movie. He literally is running the entire movie. Every time he eats or drinks, it's within the moment, and it's just for sustenance, because he need what they would say now is this guy needs calories for energy, but he's drinking coffee. There's a great scene where you see the drug dealer inside of Ratner's or wherever he is, one of the diners, and then that's the difference. There's a scene where he's inside of like this nice New York kind of lunch restaurant during the day, and he's obviously having a business deal, and they are getting coffee, and the waiter comes along and has the silver tray and pours their coffee, and while he's pouring the coffee outside the window, you see Gene Hackman he's got a cup of coffee, and it's in this little cup, and he drinks it. This is long perspective. He drinks it, and he makes this face, and he pours it out like a sludge, and it just shows that the 2 sets of characters are existing on the same plane, and they are locked into one another, and the rest of the world's going on, and they know that he's following them, and he knows that they know that he's following them, but he doesn't stop. He knows he's been made, but he keeps on going. In fact, he keeps on going in the movie to the point where when the big deal happens at the end of the film, and the cops swarm the warehouse, and all of the guys are running around, they're all escaping from the factory, the warehouse. And a guy jumps off a roof, and then he's pursuing the main guy who he's pursued most of the movie. This is the French guy with the goatee. He pursues him through the factory, and it gets worse and worse. The building goes from being a dilapidated building to an old disused warehouse to an old factory to a just fucking, it looks like a bomb. I mean, it literally looks bombed. And I think that's probably because the movie is about junk, it's about heroin, and also because it's about people getting bombed. And there's a guy that they bring in to test the drugs who goes through the different purity levels, and he says, the way he describes it is accurate, but it also conveys the exterior in the film, which is the exterior and the interiors of the various bombed out buildings, from dynamite to bombed, etc. And he chases him through this place, and eventually he almost shoots Roy Scheider, who turns around and he says, Popeye. And then he sees a guy. We get a close-up perspective real quick, and then he shoots his partner, basically. And after he shoots him, Roy Scheider says, "You shot him. You shot Johnny," or whatever. And Hackman's reaction is he takes the 38, he empties out the shells, he packs them in again, and he goes, "We got to get the guy." He takes no notice of the guy that he's just shot, and he goes off into the darkness, and we hear a gunshot, And that's the end of the movie. We see that the characters, we see what happens to all the bad guys in the film. One guy gets 4 years, one guy gets let off, one guy has lack of evidence, one guy serves 4 years, and the main bad guy is never found. And that's why it's a great film. This, Rocky, the movie Rocky, which actually has the same gritty look as The French Connection, is another great 70s film because it's not about the conquest. It's not about the good guy winning. It's about the fact that sometimes you lose, but you have to keep going. And this film is also about the fact that the corruption is there's an ellipsis in terms of the corruption, because imagine that they catch the bad guys and they take all the drugs into the evidence locker. Well, 70s NYPD, the cops are going to be even worse than the bad guys, and they're going to sell it off. So it doesn't even matter. It's almost this totally nihilistic, realistic, cinema verite look at the way that the drug war has been completely kaput, and that the crime world has corrupted the forces of law and order, and they all exist in this one thing. And you have people who exist on a plane of almost, it's weird because the movie exists almost outside of morality. And that's a weird thing in a movie. The way that Friedkin accomplishes this is by the fact that he doesn't have the good guys as being good or explaining their goodness or saying their motives and going after the bad guys. They just are. They just are, and they exist, and they go after them. There's also no immorality in the movie. It's like the bad guys are portrayed with their families. They're portrayed meeting together. They are very businesslike. And it's also not an amorality. It's almost just a nothing. It's just characters who are on this relentless pursuit of predator versus prey, and the prey happens to be at the time, but it also manages to not be naturalistic. And that's weird. That's a weird thing in a movie. It's almost like a 70s proto high concept movie, but in a cinema verite naturalistic state in an urban hellscape. It's sort of I think it really kind of defies genre classification. It's a very well done movie. I really recommend The French Connection. Hackman does a thing that he does in a lot of movies, which is that it's like that linebacker thing, the Green Bay thing. He is so unstylized in terms of his movements and in terms of his presence on screen. He seems like he could be clumsy, or he's rough, like the way he's driving the car. He just bashes into everything. But it is so rough and violent that takes on its own sort of choreography. It's almost like you could not imitate the way that he does things on screen. So let's move on to Unforgiven, because this is a completely different movie. And before I get to that, hey, you guys, thank you for being here. Really appreciate you. Tonight, I'm just doing a kind of retrospective analysis, sort of loose analysis of two of Gene Hackman's great films. Again, he had an insane body of work. He's good in everything. I mean, he's good in he's in The Firm. I watched The Firm again the other night, which is also, by the way, really bad. I really enjoy it. I like the movie. Tom Cruise can do no wrong. Tom Cruise is the one. It's got Jean Triplehorn, who's the hottest woman ever in a movie. I'm a Jean Triplehorn fan. What can I say? That's very weird. But I love Jean Triplehorn. She's in Waterworld. She's in Basic Instinct. She steals Basic Instinct. She's in Joe Esterhazy's Basic Instinct. She's in The Firm. She's just great. Gene Hackman is in it. And remember, Gene Hackman, it's got Wilford Brimley, diabetes. You want to work for The Firm? Diabetes, right? And it's got Gene Hackman in it, who manages to play the corrupt lawyer who's at the head of the firm, and Tom Cruise is kind of his protege, and he sets the honey trap, he sets the honeypot, the MK Beta sex kitten role for Karina Lombard, who is in Wide Sargasso Sea, the Gene Reese book that I covered, for her to get compromat on Tom Cruise, right? She compromises him, and then they have the fact that and then they can use that to blackmail him to work for the firm. And he sets that up, and he's in the Cayman Islands, and then he tries to seduce Jean Triplehorn. But then once she slips him the Mickey, she drops that old Cosby in there for him, and he's out like a light. At his very last moment, right before we know he's about to get killed, he seems to redeem himself. He tells her, "Go. I know, basically, I know you did this for your husband. You were right. That I died a long time ago." And she goes, and that sets in motion the fact that the set of circumstances where he's going to get free of these people. And he's going to save his brother, he's going to save his wife, and he's going to save his marriage, and all because he turns into he's a bad guy, a likable bad guy, a charismatic bad guy who just with just 1 second in the look in his eyes turns into a good guy. It's not quite a good guy. He's still got to, he's still going to face justice. But he is, he tries to redeem himself in the end by doing one good deed. And he's actually, besides Tom Cruise, obviously, the best part of NG Triple. Everybody in the movie is great. It's also an annoying movie because I remember when it was filmed in Memphis, and it's one of those movies where if you've ever had a movie filmed in your town or where you were living at the time, your adopted town or somewhere where your family lives, one thing they will do when they film movies on location is try to get all the sights in. And they go to Mud Island, and then they get on this little sky train thing, and they're going all over the place. And it's like, I get it. You want to get Beale Street, and you want to get all the sights in, but it's kind of annoying because you can tell that they're doing it in the film. And it also is really weird. It doesn't. The plot doesn't make sense. Who cares? A lot of the plot, you're like, who cares? That's the same thing with Crimson Tide. You're like, first time you ever smoked a cigar? Well, let me give you a word of advice, right? I don't like kiss-ups, and I like this. I don't like to, and you're going to advance. And the guy's like, and Denzel Washington's like, yeah, I get it. I'm just here doing my job. And he's like, I can tell that you're a political guy. And it's like, how? And he's like, one thing I don't like is when people, this isn't a Gene Hackman impression, I'm just saying his dialogue. He goes, one thing I don't like is when people talk too much. You just sat there and you could have just said yes. And instead, you said yes, and you gave an answer for von Clausewitz. So that says something about your character. I don't like people who talk too much. And it's like, and another thing. And it's like, dude, shut the fuck up. Take your own advice. Fuck, I'm just trying to be here working on stuff. By the way, why does everybody on the submarine have a loud-ass Zippo and a big-ass metal clanging ring, and they've got metal on their shoe? Everything they got is metal on the thing where you're supposed to be listening. I kind of like those days in the submarine movies because they can walk around and smoke and shit, and the submarine looks too big. It's obviously there's too many people in it. It's 3 stories high and all this stuff. And I've been on a submarine. When I was an Eagle Scout. I was a Boy Scout. I was 12 years old. We got to go on that was really weird because we were in Norfolk, and we went on this weekend to a naval base. We got to ride at a hydrofoil or whatever. But we also got to go into an active submarine. And I remember we climbed down the ladder, and I said, so where's the nuke button? And the guy was like, well, you can't go in there, son. We got it. It's top secret classified. And there was a cardboard sign that said top secret over the buttons. That was it. I guess they trusted these 12-year-olds, That was a mistake. And that's where the big 9 happened. No. That was 1992. It was way before that. Anyway, what was I talking about? Oh, yeah. Yeah, thank you for being here. Will you please hit the like button? Hey, share my streams out. And also, if you feel like it, you can send me a donation. Thank you to everybody. Hey, I saw Jason come in there with $10. Thank you, Jason. Really appreciate you as always, homeboy. Keeping it locked down and tight in here. You can support me this way. And I don't know. I got a bunch of stuff coming up, I guess. But I really wanted to get to this Gene Hackman. I get very passionate about acting. I guess. Okay. So let's see. You said Hortler's secret Argentinian submarines. Are you talking about What's the thing I discovered last week? Uh, what's the star? Aldebaran. I've been schizo. I've been going down the schizo hole about Aldebaran and how Die Glück. Everybody knows Die Glück, right? Is that the bell? What's the bell? What's the Hotler bell? Right, not the Division Bell by Pink Floyd, boomers. No, that's okay. And the sun was shining. The clouds were raining. Bane was baning. His love he was feigning. That's Pink Floyd. I hope I didn't ruin Pink Floyd. Okay, so look, let's get back on this little train. That's what Lawrence Ferlinghetti, the poet, said. Poet laureate of San Francisco. Let's get back on this little train. So, Unforgiven. Yeah, if you want to support me, you can do that through the links provided. I really appreciate that, you guys. Unforgiven. Unforgiven is a 1992 film by Clint Eastwood. My friend Logan, I haven't asked him. One of my best friends, I haven't talked to him in a while about Clint Eastwood, but I remember at the time he hated this movie because he hated Clint Eastwood's directing. Now that I'm older, I think that he probably would have changed his mind because it's totally different. We like Tombstone. Now, Tombstone is, the greatest Western. Tombstone, I like, what is it, 310 to Yuma? I can't remember if it's 410 or 310. I have time blindness. In fact, I don't even know what that word means. I'm looking at the time counter here, and all I see is little symbols. I don't know what they mean. I know that it got darker later, which sucks. I like it when I wake up and it's dark, and then it goes overcast, and then it rains, and everybody else is miserable, and I go outside and stand there, and I go, yes, right? Do you feel in charge? And then I like it when it gets dark at like 3 o'clock. I like that. I like that I can see Aldebaran. Aldebaran is the 14th brightest star in the sky. And if you follow Orion's belt, it's like red right up there. Jupiter, right now, I've been reading a lot of astronomy recently. I really want to get a telescope. You guys help me get a telescope because I want to be a telescopic person. I really want to get a telescope and just be a simple dude and just go outside and just look in my telescope at all night and not across from my high rise at the other people in the apartments. Okay, I want to go look at the sky, and I want to go look at the earthshine and the moon, and I want to see Aldebaran. Anyway, Tombstone, I got 2 guns, one for each of you. Oh, that's just my game. Play for blood, remember? You're Daisy if you do. Why, darling, you're not wearing the bustle. How, dude? Ajay Kwarajis. Magister. Look, darling, apparently Johnny Ringo's an educated man. Now I really hate him. So that's my favorite Western. But Unforgiven is, let's get to Unforgiven. Unforgiven is 1992 Clint Eastwood, and this really is a fantastic movie. It won Best Picture, Best Director for Clint Eastwood, and Best Supporting Actor for Gene Hackman. And not only does it have a fantastic cast, of course, it's Clint Eastwood in the main role. My personal close best friend, Morgan Freeman, plays the supporting role of Ned. I was just driving by his house. My cousin, I can share this. My cousin trades hay for, he gives Morgan Freeman hay, and Morgan Freeman cuts half of his fields. Did you know that? You didn't. Why would you know that? It'd be weird if you knew that. We were just right past his house the other day when I was down there last week, and Morgan Freeman gave one of the best Oscar. When I went to his house, I've been to his house. When I went to his house, he showed me his office. I'm not lying about this. He showed me his office, and he had all of his awards, and there was a space, and he said that the space had a plaque, and it said reserved for Oscar. And then he won the Oscar, but it wasn't for this. It was for that terrible movie. It was another Clint Eastwood movie, but it was Million Doll Hair Baby. You remember that movie? She paid $1 million hairs. So she could, I guess she wanted to, I don't know, whatever. Anyway, he's great in this. Gene Hackman's in it. Richard Harris is in the movie. And they also have that little fella who plays the guy in True Romance, which was written by Quentin Tarantino, who wrote the fictional sequel to Apocalypse Now, Home in a Body Bag. Remember the producer? His name is I forget his name. Anyway, he actually plays an important role in this where he plays we'll just say he plays the writer, okay? You'll know who I'm talking about if you watch the movie. He's like, hello, I wanted to get, okay, anyway. But this is a great movie because, first of all, it's a meta film. It's a meta narrative on the end of Westerns. And Clint Eastwood is obviously wrapping up his Western career, his career in making Westerns, with this film. And it is supposed to, the movie shows you what happens to the man with no name and the gunslinger once he lives the rest of his life and rides off into the sunset and where he goes. And the movie is also a kind of weird sequel to High Plains Drifter. I think High Plains Drifter is Clint Eastwood's best Western movie. I love that movie. You know, Paint the Town Red, Call It Hell. He's the man with no name, and we see him as an angel of death riding on a pale horse. Behold, a pale horse. He's riding the white horse into town, and he is an angel of death or an angel of retribution, setting the town back to right and punishing the evildoers by whipping them. And the same thing occurs in this, including the fact that the pimp in this movie plays is also in High Plains Drifter. Now, the movie basically is about that William Money, get it? William, Munny, William Money, like Bill Money. He's got to pay his bills with money. Bill Money. He goes on his mission to pay bills. He's living out there on the range in Kansas with his little boy and his little girl, and his wife, his dearly departed wife, is buried under the tree that looks like for him the tree of life, because she is his life. She's given him access to a kind of salvation through his family in the film, but it's also the tree of knowledge of good and evil. He has plucked from this tree, and he set his life in motion, and now he has to go back into his old life. And at the beginning of the film, we get this town called Big Whiskey, where Gene Hackman is the sheriff. Big old. He's called Lil Bill. It's one of those instances where, you know, a gigantic character or a gigantic guy in life is either going to be called big or little. I went to the Clarksdale Blues Museum last week, and they had all these clothes in displays of all these blues musicians named Big something. You know, they had Muddy Waters. They had Muddy Waters, Willie Dixon, Howlin' Wolf, all these people. But they also had all these big guys. And they were big. I mean, this guy had size 34 shoes. This guy's suit was so fucking big. And he's playing this little-ass guitar that he made out of like an oak plank. So anyway, and by the way, Morgan Freeman, another connection. Morgan Freeman owns the Blues Club right next to it. So Lil Bill is Gene Hackman because he's so big in the movie. He's the sheriff, and we begin with a bordello, a house of ill repute, where you have a bunch of guys turning off the lights into Stygian blackness and lying down on top of a lady for a couple minutes. I don't know. Filthy stuff. And we get this guy, and he cuts up this hua. He cuts her up real bad with his knife. And one of the things in the movie that's weird is that the action of doing what he does, he cuts her face up with his big buck knife, and that sets in motion the fact that the pimp wants to be paid for the loss to his property. So they get so these cowboys have to go off and they have to get horses and bring them back. But then the huas have to they've collected $1,000, which is like a trillion dollars back in the day. And they have sent the word out that they want vengeance on these guys. And so what happens is, so one of the weird things is that the sex worker who is cut up is actually way prettier than the other ladies that are there. She looks fine. She actually looks very pretty and normal in the movie. And I think that was, I guess there was no real way to do this because later on in the film, this isn't a knock against the film, but later on in the film, they have to have a scene where basically she offers herself to William Money, Clint Eastwood, and he denies her, and she says, "Oh no, I didn't mean me. I meant, taking an advance on the other women." And he says, "It's not you. I mean, if I was to be so inclined, that I would take an advance with you, but I can't because of my wife." And she says, "Your wife lives back there?" And he says, "Yeah, she's back there watching over my kids." So he thinks of her as alive, and this gives us more sympathy for the character because he still maintains some sort of decency. And we know through rumor and innuendo that he is the worst, most vicious killer the West ever saw. But what's weird about the movie and what makes it great is the fact that we don't see that with him until the very end of the movie when he comes back for vengeance. And that's because they have killed Morgan Freeman's character. They've whipped him, and they've put him in a box for the public to see, and they've hung a sign on him, and this pisses him off. But for the rest of the movie, Clint Eastwood is really trying to be a human again. And one thing that they do in movies with characters like this happens in Schindler's List too. One thing they do in movies is whenever they want to show a big, larger than life character, and first time we see him when the movie opens, we see this panorama with the sunset. So it's the sunset of his life. It begins and ends on a sunset. So this is all his sunset period. And there's a tree, and he is a dark silhouette against the sky. And so we see that he's a kind of larger than life character. He's legendary. He's mythological. And when the next scene is in the morning, and he's slopping them hogs. He's out there slopping them hogs. So piggy. We got a real blue ribbon special here, son. And his little son is looking at him like, dude, this guy's old as hell. And he falls into the mud, and he's got pig slop all over him. And he's got goblin vomit and slop all over him. But he's humble. He falls into the dirt. The first time he tries to get on a horse, he falls off the horse. He gets bucked by the horse. He cannot ride the horse anymore. So the more that a character falls into the dirt, the more that we see that they are in touch with what life is, which is actually coming to terms with his death, because he's covered in dust, to dust, and that he is lower than us. We in fact, when we see him go down into the mud, it's almost like the camera is up sitting, it's like a guy is filming it standing on the fence. So we're looking down at him rather than looking up. We're looking at him in silhouette. He can't shoot, and in fact, he hadn't fired his pistol in so long, he has to get out a shotgun, and when he fires a shotgun, he gets mean, and that's when he blasts the can off of a tree stump. But then we know that it's really his anger and frustration that allows him to do these things. But one of the things about the movie is the fact that the motivation for what these guys are doing, because they discuss that when he goes to pick up Morgan Freeman, his partner, and they have been told about this from their this guy, the Schofield kid, who clearly the Schofield kid has never killed anybody, and he wants to be a legendary Wild West guy, a bounty hunter, an assassin. And so we see these different archetypes of characters, and he wants to be a kind of Billy the Kid, but he clearly has not killed anybody, because he spends the entire movie talking about how mean he is and how he would do this and he would do that. And we know when you're watching it even first time, you figure that when he finally gets down to do the deed, when he kills the guy, he kills this unarmed guy in an outhouse, and it's very awkward how it happens. And then he has to come to terms with the fact that he just killed a man, and he gives it up. And he's the only character who really escapes, because William Money at the end of the film has to go back to his family, and he has to come to terms with his deeds. He's been back to drinking whiskey. He has to do that to be mean again, to kill Gene Hackman in the film. But he's the only one who kind of escapes. Morgan Freeman doesn't escape. The sex workers don't escape. Gene Hackman doesn't escape. Gene Hackman's character is very honest about what he's doing, and he is completely menacing in the movie. Gene Hackman's character, Lil Bill, is supposed to collect on the debt. He says you're going to forego the trial, and he lets the cutter go as long as they collect their horses and bring them and pay the pimp. So in effect, he is doing the lawman thing of keeping the peace. And he he makes an example of Richard Harris's character, English Bob, who is a famous gunslinger, but who when you're watching the film and there's a scene where he's in the train and there's a myth around him and he's constantly talking about the Queen and, he has a posh accent, but when it comes down to it that this guy is all talk. He's either all talk or he's fake or he's lived that way through luck. So he's probably killed a bunch of guys and he's collected on stuff, but he's making his own myth. And that's why he has the Beauchamp or whatever character trailing along with him so that he can feed his ego and he can have this story told about him because that's going to be his real life. But when he gets beat up, he doesn't even get killed. He gets beat up in the town because Gene Hackman's setting an example and saying, tell this to all the assassins. I don't like assassins. I don't like people that come here and try to mess with my town. But the weird thing is the moral ambiguity of these characters. And I think what the movie really conveys is the fact that it's a lot like life. And that sounds probably, you're going, obviously. Well, the reason I think it's a lot like life is because we see what happens to people who live. If you live by the sword, you figure you're going to die by the sword. And you got to live with all the decisions that you make. There's a great monologue or a great dialogue. I'm sorry, great dialogue in the scene in the film where after they kill one of the cowboys, who is the guy who plays William Hale in the Crucible movie, they shoot him from a distance, and Morgan Freeman, while he's about to shoot him, has second thoughts and he says, "I can't shoot him." The Schofield kid is short-sighted, so he's short-sighted in terms of he can't shoot a guy from a long distance, but he's also short-sighted in terms of his life. He thinks that he's going to live this life this way and he's going to make money and he's going to live this myth and he's going to live a legend, but he actually doesn't see that when he takes a life, it's going to be terrible and there's going to be practical consequences with it. Because when they shoot the guy at the quarry or whatever, the guy is crying out that he wants water, and Clint Eastwood has to say, "Give him some water, damn it. I'm not going to shoot you." And we hear this guy crying for water, and he's talking about how he doesn't want to die. And then they instantly regret that this is one of the guys that they killed, because this wasn't even the bad guy. They also, when they're trying to track down the bad guys who cut up the woman, they realize that maybe they don't realize, but we realize as an audience, that part of this is the myth, part of the story has gone on rumor, and the rumor also works in a number of ways. Rumors work to make some of the characters huge, to delineate their legend, but it also amplifies and hyperbolizes some of the characters and also the deeds. So, for instance, the lady that's been cut up is really not that cut up that bad. They think she's had her nose cut off, her fingers cut off, so they think she's been totally mutilated. But it turns out she hasn't, and she's still functional, and she's a pretty lady. So when they get there, they don't even know if the money they've been promised is real. They don't know if they're going to get their $1,000. And it turns out that by pursuing all this stuff, they end up not only harming themselves and harming each other, but they kind of come to terms with their former life. So their sin catches up with them in the end. Morgan Freeman, his character lives on this farm with an Indian lady, and he's making a life, but he doesn't seem to have any children around, so he's got really no future. He's sort of living in the present and with the past. William Money has kids to go back to, so there's a future for him. The other guy, who's short-sighted, thinks he has a future, but he doesn't really have a future. Gene Hackman is living in the present, and he's building a house, but the house is all askew. And that's also one of the symbols in the movie, the fact that he's building this house and he can't set the angles right. I think there's something in there there's something in terms of the motifs and the themes about him being a carpenter, but being an ill-begotten carpenter. He's not a peacemaker. He's not really for the Prince of Peace. He's there for order, but he becomes the most violent and visceral character in the film, and the way that he treats people is not with it becomes with utter cruelty, and they cross a line, and it's very difficult to see where they cross a line in the movie. So it's not simple where you have good guys, bad guys, and people doing their business, two people doing their. It's not like French Connection at all. It's not in terms of the characters and how they exist. These are characters who are conflicted and who are incredibly complex, and they're just dudes, but they are they're constantly trying to come to terms with what they had in life. And by the end of the film, when Clint Eastwood comes back to the town and it's raining, and he walks into this bar, we see this great image of him dropping the shotgun down, and he blasts the pimp first, and then he gets Little Bill, and then he ends up the Beauchamp guy thinks that he sees like money in his eyes. He sees, oh, this is the guy. I've been through a bunch of stages of these gunslingers, and this is the real deal. But when he says, who was the first guy you killed, Clint Eastwood has this great line about, well, I don't know, but I know who'll be the last, and that scares off the guy. So it shows that he's different than the other characters. The great line in the movie is where Schofield Kid and Clint Eastwood are talking under this tree. Again, they're under another tree, just like the movie began, like the movie ends. And he says, I never killed a man before. And he says, that's a tough business, killing a man. You take away all he ever had and all he's ever going to have. And the kid says, yeah, we had it coming to him. And Clint Eastwood says this great line about, we all have it coming to us, kid. And I think that's a lot that shows you it's a great sort of, not realistic, it's a great kind of mythical look at the way that life is and how we have to deal with the everyday dirt in life, the everyday things. We all are just looking for our place in the dirt, while Matthew McConaughey's trying to find a satellite up to the no. Remember he says that in Interstellar or Westworld. Remember Westworld? Yeah, I know your game. I'm going to play your game. I'm going to play it to the bone. This movie also sets the stage for Westworld, and I've never played Red Dead Redemption. I'm past that in terms of it passed me by, but I do know what it is, and I've watched streams on. The most streams I've watched on Red Dead Redemption are while Nick Mullen and the gang are talking, and I've watched it in the clips, and also I just whatever. Anyway, this obviously sets that whole. It was really a renaissance for Western movies in the '90s. It really did spur this stuff on. Hey. Shouts out to Dean right there. He says, so glad I rediscovered this channel, Bazed. It's good shit. Hey, thank you, Dean Burrito. Really appreciate you, homeboy. Thank you everybody for being here tonight. Thank you for being here to watch this Gene Hackman, kind of an analytical retrospective of two of these films. I think that it's important to go over Unforgiven. I remember when Unforgiven came out because it came out at the same time as the Metallica song Unforgiven, The Unforgiven. And I remember thinking, like, I was 12, so I was like, why don't they have the clips of the movie in the music video? Why is this dumbass old man in this music video? Like, you remember the music video for Metallica? Anyway, Mela says, I've wasted many hours on that game. I hear it's great. I hear it's the greatest video game ever made. When I'm working, I usually put on walkthrough. I usually put it on walkthroughs of Elder Scrolls, Oblivion, or Skyrim or something, and I put it on like wintertime ambiance. But I never played the game. Isn't that weird? Anyway, so yeah, I think that the movie is Unforgiven is really important. Because Clint Eastwood, I hope he lasts a lot longer. I hope he continues to last. But we don't live in that world, so I'm sorry that Gene Hackman passed away. I don't really want to. I haven't mentioned his manner of passing because I really don't want to. I find that to be. It's just not something I find that to be kind of not crass for people to talk about. I just don't really want to talk about it here. I think that it's like this. He was 95 years old, and I think that it used to be. I'm old enough to remember when, in the old days, when old people passed away, they passed away of old age. Okay, there was no horrible cause of death, and I'm happy to leave it that way. Now that might be pulling the wool over my eyes or over my own eyes or whatever, but I'm not really concerned with that. I'm just talking about his work, his life in movies, and I think that that's important because, after all, we want to be mourned, but we also want to be remembered for our work that we did and for our lives rather than the manner of our passing. That's the final moment of the thing, unless it happens to be noble or glorious, right? Hopefully that'll be for us all. I'll be able to run into that burning building, or you seen that it's like that video of the woman running down the street and she gets struck by lightning. She gets up and runs. She gets struck by lightning again, and she keeps running. I'm like, oh my goodness. I mean, if that happens to me, that's it. It's time. It was meant to be. Unless you become Electric Man. No. But listen, so I haven't really. Other people can go into that, but I think that this movie is really important to talk about because, at the end of the day, the characters remain, especially William Money, remains unforgiven. He never asks for forgiveness. He simply does. Now he's doing this for his family, but he realizes the error of his ways, and he realizes that in the end, it's all vengeance. But vengeance builds on vengeance in the film until there's nothing left, and he thankfully is able to go home at the end of the film and find his children in the sunset. And that is, I like that the movie ends that way, but it is not a joyful movie. It's not happy, and it's not necessarily a realistic movie, but it is truthful in the sense that I think that one really cool thing in it is that you are aware watching it that this actor, that this character is kind of the embodiment of all the roles that he's played in films. And this is what happens at the end. This is the final arc. This is the end of the arc about what happens to the guy now and with all of his associates. So Gene Hackman in the movie, again, just to talk about him really briefly, is so good because one thing that happens with him in films is he's often given a lot of dialogue. One of the reasons why I think that The Conversation is so good is because it's called The Conversation, but there's very little conversation from him in the movie. It's all the NSA listening to conversation, and the conversation, innuendo, rumor, gossip, and intelligence and murder and all these things take place, but he is a kind of witting participant in them without partaking in it except through action. And he is forced to talk through a saxophone. It's jazz in a silent cage. He's forced to play music inside of a kind of Faraday cage in the movie. And that is a strange irony in the film. But with Gene Hackman, he is often given so much dialogue in movies because he's a great talker. He's great to listen to, and he's got so much charisma. I'll just say it one more time. I really liked his work. I like his acting. I think it's fantastic. He's a kind of Lee J. Cobb from On the Waterfront. He's a kind of Robert Mitchum. He's got gravitas. He's got humor. He's got all these things. But he also could be like a guy who's friends with your granddad. And you believe him in movies. People often describe him as a character actor who made his way into being a leading man, but he's not quite that. By character actor they mean a guy that you believe in movies, that you don't really know much about. That's mainly because of his face and his body and his sort of the way he carries himself. But he's not really that in films. He's actually just he's a believable, truthful character in films that seems to be always kind of the same, but always different enough where he is unexpected. It's an unexpected motion that he has, an unexpected violence, an unexpected emotion. Everything about his work seems to be kind of unexpected. And one of the great things in art of any kind, of any medium, is unexpected is unexpectation. The fact that you have an unpredictability of what characters are going to do, or what the words are going to say, or what the action is, or what the sounds are going to be. Unforgiven, in terms of its score, is pretty spare, but it also has a natural kind of ambiance, so that we have the silence of the characters living with themselves. In the French Connection, we have the exact opposite. We've got the din of the city, and we've got this menacing industrial death sound that goes through it. There are scenes with Gene Hackman in the bar in that film where he's looking at people, and we hear this resonating tin sound that sounds like his ears are ringing, and that's because he is totally locked into getting these characters, to getting the bad guys. And we hear the harsh sounds of industrial, urban, postmodern violence in a visceral sense. And I think that, he really chose his roles well. And that's about all I got for Gene Hackman, you guys. So that is going to conclude this analysis of Unforgiven, French Connection. I threw in some Crimson Tide there. He did a lot more movies. He did Hoosiers. He did. I talked a little bit about. I've done The Conversation. Enemy of the State. He was even in The Replacements. Right, with Keanu Reeves. He was good in that film. Royal Tenenbaums, he's fantastic. Royal Tenenbaums is kind of Gene Hackman's Unforgiven role. It's very similar in terms of the sentiment of an old man coming to terms with his life. And even though the movies are completely different genres, completely different aesthetic, everything's different about the movies, but the characters are similar in that sense. So let's see if we got anything with super chats here. If you want to super chat, you want to ask me a question, now's your time, and I will get to you. And thank you all for being here in the first place. Really appreciate everybody. If you want to grab a membership, you can also do that. I will have some more member streams coming up for the special beings. Shouts out to Mud right there, who drops $5 and says, I don't care what anyone says, Enemy of the State is one of the greatest movies ever made. Hackman opened my eyes to government corruption at 8 years old. Hey, I agree with you, Mud. Thank you for that super chat. Really appreciate you. And it's one of those movies that was it's well done, and I did not appreciate it at the time. I didn't really like it, and now we can see all these years later that there is definitely a truth to it. It seemed so ridiculous at the time, but that is because of the deniability and the insanity built into that system. I will again recommend this book, High Concept, by Charles Fleming. This talks about the making of Crimson Tide and how Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer, Gene Hackman was one of their go-to actors. One of the things that they always do in movies is that you always have films by Simpson and Bruckheimer that are a vision of America, where you begin the movie at dawn and you end at dusk. And we usually have a kind of transparent or translucent American flag waving. We do have a lot. Obviously, there's a lot of military-industrial complex propaganda happening in the films, obviously, especially after Simpson passed away, with Bruckheimer movies and Michael Bay movies. There's a lot of that. These guys love films where you have lines of military figures who are standing in the rain. And one of the things that doesn't work about Crimson Tide is Gene Hackman's character gives this too long speech. He was given too many words to talk to his crew of the submarine before they roll up into the roll tide, into the USS Alabama. And it's in the rain, but you notice that he's walking with an umbrella. And you think, okay, is this because he's got his Jack Russell dog? Really, it's like I can picture the movie, and there's a great scene in the rain in The Rock, which works like this, but they're in combat, they're in action, and so they're all covered, they're all doused in rain. But it shows that, a hard rain's going to fall and that things are looking gloomy, and they are in hardship and pain. But in this scene, it doesn't work because the characters are all dry, even though they're standing in the rain, and they're about to be in the water. They're about to be in the submarine. So you can tell that practically it didn't work for them to be filming this scene, but it looked cool. But they didn't think that anybody would look too deeply into at the moment of why he's walking around with an umbrella. It doesn't make sense he's walking around with an umbrella. It makes sense practically speaking, but to show that he was like his men, they should have all been doused in rain. They should have had their max on or whatever and been rained on. So anyway, but Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer's movies are always frenetic in that sense, and they always have a kind of kinetic energy which fits Gene Hackman extremely well. He's a reliable character for their movies, and he also plays an interesting, he's an interesting. There's an interesting dichotomy between Denzel's character and Gene Hackman, which is obviously a follow-up to some of the things that occurred in Hunt for Red October, and later on are going to kind of go back in time with U-571 and a lot of the great. I think that's a very solid submarine film. I like that film a lot, but they made great movies, and they made the tentpole sort of concept for films which really didn't exist before. Remember that the first summer blockbuster is Jaws with Roy Scheider. Jaws actually takes a lot from The French Connection. The sounds of the movie really take a lot from that. But their concept of the business of movie making was completely different than the auteur. Their feeling was like, we had these auteurs in the 70s, and they had these directors had free reign. Well, we're going to rein that shit right in. Here's what we want. We want a movie about these two dudes. They are co-pilots of this F-16 Tomcat, and they are at Top Gun school, and there's going to be some tragedy, and then the one guy, he's going to win, but he's sort of not going to win. It's going to be a lot of athletics. It's going to be an MTV movie. It's going to be military-industrial complex. We're going to have recruitment come up. The kids are going to like it. Give me a script by tomorrow. Do it. And they had these what they call tentpole features for movies, which is they sank all of their advertising, all of their budget into the movie, and that it allowed for an explosive event for a film. It wasn't just going to a movie; it was an event. It was a summer blockbuster. It broke the block, and so that provided for the funding for all of the other movies to be made. And Miramax and Weinstein and all these people they used that for years to do the same thing. Even though Weinstein made a lot of indie flicks with Miramax, it had a lot of input in that. But that was all because of the budget that these big budget movies made, and we're still dealing with that. It's kind of gone awry. The Oscars this year, I'll say that. Did you guys? I meant to say this about the Oscars. Here's my take on the Oscars. I watched it so you don't have to. I've watched every Oscar ceremony since, I guess, about 1989. And I watched every single one. I love movies, and I usually just find myself with nothing else to do, and I watch the movies. I was really into watching the ceremonies and stuff, especially in the 90s and 2000s. I thought it was really cool, and I was learning more and more about movies when I was a kid. But it was the worst. It was the worst Academy Awards I have ever seen. And I think it was even worse than 2021 and 2022 when there wasn't even anybody there. Because this time there were people there, but there were, and I don't care about fame or any of that. I'm not talking about that. There was not if you're going to watch the Oscars, you're going to have famous people there. That's why they're there. And there wasn't a single damn famous person in the whole place. It was very, very weird until Morgan Freeman showed up and gave the best part. Morgan Freeman gave a nice memoriam for his friend Gene Hackman. Morgan Freeman also gave one of the best Oscar-winning speeches of all time. That's when he came out and he said, thank you, and walked off. That's basically what it is. It was very, very good. But there wasn't really anything good. I mean, Dune 2 won 2 awards, I think, for sound. This was the first year where my predictions about the Oscars were complete. Usually I'm completely right. Usually I have almost every single prediction right about who will win and who should win. And this year I got almost every single one of them wrong, and that's never happened before. And it made me aware that it's not that I don't know movies anymore. It's the fact that I think that the movie industry doesn't know movies right now. Not speaking for, I have friends who work in the movie industry, and it's not them. I'm talking about the way the movie industry sees itself and what they're doing. They've got to come to the end of this arc. They are so completely, the people in charge are so completely out of touch with what's happening in the world and the way that life is. They're so completely out of touch. Look, man, I watched Den of Thieves 2, Pantera, and it was an entertaining movie. I enjoyed watching it. I'm glad I watched it. I like Gerard Butler. Things are about to get sporty. I like Gerard Butler a lot. And I felt bad for him that they made this movie that was too long and that really was clearly supposed to be the Pink Panther combined with Heat. And the problem was they wanted you to care about the characters like in Heat, but it was either AI or AI enhanced, or it was just poor writing. Paul Newman said that the reason he and Robert Redford hadn't done any movies since I guess Butch Cassidy was the fact that there were no good scripts in Hollywood. And there are people writing good scripts. Shit, hire me, dude. I'll write you a fucking killer script. I'll write you whatever, man. Give me a contract. Give me an advance on a publishing deal. Publish my book, Monarch, and then make a movie out of it. That would be a killer movie. But and my friend Paul, give my friend Paul a movie. Let him write a movie, please. He's been working there long enough. He would write a killer fucking movie. He would kill it. But that's not the way it is right now, I guess. And the thing is that the reason the movie fails is because the little things, the little nuances of human beings and what they do and how they talk to each other and how they exist in a day are not accessible by AI or by people who think like AI. And that is what makes a movie. Those little things are what make a movie. Like the scene with Gene Hackman with the coffee cup and pouring the coffee out. That's human. That's what makes a movie. It's that little touch. It shows so much about his character and about the pursuit. But they don't. You can't get that when you are just when you're just crawling the web for things that people have written before and trying to put them all in one work and making what you think people would write. Anytime that artists make any type of artwork that they think will be for people that everyone will enjoy it ends up being that nobody enjoys it. You have to have things that are written for yourself at your best. And that's just not the way it is right now. Another thing is that people, I guess in the entertainment industry confuse belief systems with ideology, and that's just not true. The two things are exclusive. They oftentimes do not go well together. So your political ideology can be a reflection of your belief system, but if that is your belief system, oftentimes you have no belief, and that leads to a kind of vacuous emptiness, especially in films, because we're not interested in the characters. We have to relate to characters when we're watching. They have to be people that we think are cool, or that they're vile, or they're funny, or they are relatable or complex. There's all this range of things that we think of in terms of human beings, and that's just not happening in most movies right now. So that's my critique of the Oscar ceremony and of what went on there. Okay, so I think I have one more super chat coming here. Someone look at that real quick, and then we'll roll on out of here. Hey, shouts out to Mud again for that $5. I believed everything in that movie 100% real at 8 years old. There was something about how simple the corruption was, like it was just good business. Thank you, Mud. Really appreciate that. Thank you to Jason again for that. Let's see. Jason dropped me $10 on PayPal. Thank you so much, Jason, for that $10. Really appreciate you. Shouts out. Let's see. Got a couple in here who came in while I was on vacation. Shouts out to everybody out there, and there's Lyndon. Shouts out to you for that $25. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you out there. Thank you to Thank you to, if I missed you, please forgive me. Jeremy Hathcock sent me $5 on Venmo. Thank you so much. Hey, everybody, thank you so much for the for the support. If you want to support me, you can do that in the links provided here or in the video description at any time, and I'll give you a shout out. If I didn't get to you, I'll get to you next time, definitely. Don't forget, you can write to me at madmaximalism with 2 X's at gmail.com. Madmaximalism, all one word with 2 X's at gmail.com. You can write to me, give me your thoughts. You can send me your work. Maybe I'll take a look at that, especially if you help me out with a little dono there. Would really appreciate it. Thanks to everybody here. Thank you, Sabrina, Kit. Thank you to Crystalline out there. Everybody, really appreciate you. Hey, listen, there's a lot going on in the world right now, and there's a lot going on with people and a lot of loss in the world. And I don't want to say anything too specific, but I will say we got to be thankful for our loved ones and reach out to them, spend time with them, and answer those phone calls and give our friends phone calls. I really believe, I think texting is great, obviously, and it is what it is, but it ain't what it ain't. And it's good to hear people's voices, and especially to meet up with them in public when we can, especially our friends on the internet. Especially we can meet up in person with our friends, the ones we've talked to for so long. That's important, and meet up with our family and our families. Tell them you love them because it's a precarious world, but God provides. So thank you so much, everybody out there. Really appreciate you. Let's end this one with Sting and then cut off his new album, right? Take it away. Listen, was it worth it? Yeah, it's worth it if you're strong enough. All right, love you guys. Here's Rooks G and Once and For All. Thanks, y'all. Peace. I love you. Shouts out to Ethan for that $30 the other day. Thank you so much, Ethan. Really appreciate you out there, buddy. Love you, man. Peace. Thank you so much.